I'm often called Colonel Badass. I'm proud of that title. I worked hard to get it. I work hard to keep it. There's a lot of definitions for badass. Mine is around leadership and power. A badass uses disruptive leadership to do the right thing and to protect the powerless. In 1977, I was a brand new officer in the US Army, stationed over in Korea. Every day, men would try to disrespect me. They would try to refuse to salute me. They would call me very nasty names. They would even attempt inappropriate touch. It was exhausting. My male peers would talk about, well, they're going to stay in the Army 10, 20, 30 years. They're going to make colonel. They're going to make general. I just wanted to get through the 4 years I owed, maybe make captain, and leave with my dignity. Well, 1977, that is also the year that the US Army discovered equal opportunity. Oh my gosh, there's this thing called equal opportunity. We have to have a conference. So the highest command, 8th Army, said, okay, everyone send a representative. We're having a conference. Well, my unit sent me because I was the only woman. And I showed up at 8th Army, walked into the conference room. It was one of those big conference rooms, you know, with the really big table. And every seat was taken around the table, except the head, and every seat along the wall was taken. And everyone in that room were black men sergeants. I was the only white woman officer. I did not want to sit at the head of the table. But a sergeant major said, ma'am, here's your seat. I took my seat. I looked at them. They looked at me. We waited. And all of a sudden, a door flings open, and this white male major comes storming in, and he says, we have racism in Korea. You have 3 hours, fix it. And then he left. And when I look back at all these brown eyes, I just said, honestly, it's not my fault. And they did what you did. They laughed. And they go, ma'am, it's not our fault either. So for the 3 hours, they shared with me what it was like to be black in the Army. One sergeant said to me, ma'am, you don't know how many times I was passed up for the good job because I'm black. Another man said, ma'am, you don't know how many times the white soldier got credit for my good work. And then the sergeant major said, ma'am, you don't know how many times I've been called nigger in uniform. I realized I was not the only one fighting for respect. When the 3 hours were over, I have to admit we did not solve racism. When they were over, the sergeant major came up to me and he said, young lieutenant, you have power. Would you please use your power to take care of every soldier, black, white, or brown? I said, yes, Sergeant Major. And that's when I realized I did have power. I had power as an officer. I had power as a white person. I had power to protect the powerless. A few years later, I am a captain, West Germany. And one Saturday afternoon, I'm sitting in a car outside a gymnasium. I'm waiting for my boyfriend to finish up. And in front of me is a playground, and it's empty, except for a picnic table. There's 3 young black soldiers just sitting there talking. And I'm waiting. And then I see a military Jeep with 4 white military police officers drive by. And then I heard this screech of tires, and they did a U-turn. They came back. And all of a sudden, those 4 jumped out of the Jeep, started running towards the 3 black soldiers, yelling racial slurs. So I grabbed my wallet and I jumped out of the car and I ran between the two. And the sergeant of the MP said, "Get out of my way." And I said, "No, Sergeant, I won't." And he was, "Well, who the hell are you?" And I flipped open my wallet and I showed my military ID card. And I said, "I'm Captain Morgenthaler. Who the hell are you?" "Well, ma'am." "Well, ma'am, we got a complaint that these soldiers have been yelling obscenities at passersby." I said, "No, Sergeant. They've been sitting here quietly talking to each other. And on their faces, I saw this relief. It broke my heart." So I turned back to the MP and I said, "So one of two things is true. You were either lied to or you're lying to me. Which is it, Sergeant?" "Ma'am, I guess we better go back and check that false complaint." "Yeah, I guess you better." They drove off and I turned to the three soldiers and said, "Have a nice day." And that's when it really came home to me. The sergeant major was so right. I did have power. I had power to use to help do the right thing and protect the powerless. After the three sergeants, I said, "Have a nice day." I was an executive officer. An executive officer is responsible for taking care of the troops, making sure they're fed and combat ready. I had several hundred soldiers I was taking care of. I had three great sergeants working for me. They were women, they were black, they were great. Tanya, Karen, and LaJoyce. One night, Tanya called me up and she said, "Ma'am, can you come back to the office? But don't tell anyone." I'm like, "Sure." And I went back to the office, and here were these three sergeants, scared. Took them in the office, closed the door, and I said, "What's wrong?" And Tanya said, "Ma'am, criminal investigations is coming after us." "What?" "They're going to try and prove we're lesbians and kick us out." What they didn't realize is at that point, I had a huge quandary. Months earlier, the commander, a colonel, had called me into his office and he had said, "Morgenthaler, we have lesbians in this unit. I want you to hunt them down and kick them out." And I remember looking at him thinking, I joined the Army to hunt down communists, not lesbians. And so I'd gone back to my office and I opened up the military law book and I realized, oh my gosh, it's a felony to be gay. They could go to prison. They would lose their GI Bill. They could never hold a federal job. And now I had three self-confessed lesbians looking at me. And that's when I became a disruptive leader. I decided I'm disobeying an order, and I'm helping these women break the law. So I opened up the military law book, and I showed them exactly what the Army was going to try and prove. Then I looked at the three women, I said, whatever you do, you cannot admit that you are lesbians. And Tanya got this big smile, and she said, "Ma'am, I can't hide the fact that I'm a woman. I can't hide the fact that I'm black. I can hide the fact that I'm a lesbian." And the three stayed in on their own terms and did great things. So rule number one on disruptive leadership: to do the right thing, to protect the powerless, be willing to disobey an order, break a law, ignore a regulation. Fast forward 20-some years. To my surprise, I am still in the Army. And I'm now a colonel. And in 2004, I was stationed over in Iraq. One day, my phone rang. It was a civilian from the Midwest, Mr. C. And I was surprised. I despise Mr. C. and he knew it. He used his power for personal gain. I remember one time he misappropriated laptops, and I raised holy hell. And I actually had a general say, "Play nice with Mr. C." And I said, "No, sir, he's dirty." So I was very shocked that Mr. C called me. And he explained to me that he was mentoring a young man. Let's name him Eddie. He's mentoring Eddie, and Eddie wanted to do something for the troops in Iraq. So Eddie was willing to set up websites for all of us. 2004, websites were a mystery. So I said, "I would love to have a website. Please connect me to Eddie." I loved getting to know Eddie. He was 15 years old, same age as my son, a great young man. One day, Eddie called me up in Baghdad. He was so excited. He had won Patriot of the Year award from that Midwest command. And the prize was to visit these military installations, and Mr. C would be his chaperone. And inside, I screamed, "No! This is wrong!" I had no proof this is wrong. But one thing I have learned in life, if you are dirty in one area, you might be dirty in another area. I wasn't the only one who felt this. A group of mothers went to the commanding general and said, "Sir, don't let this happen." He berated them for casting doubts on Mr. C's character. In hindsight, I know now what I should have done. I should have given someone the authority to push me to do the right thing, to listen to my gut, to protect the powerless. Someone like the sergeant major to say, "Ma'am, it's not about being a woman, it's not about being a mother. You are a colonel, you go use that power and you tell that general this is wrong." But instead, I did nothing. Mr. C raped Eddie. Rule number 2, give someone the authority to push you to do the right thing, because sometimes it is so easy not to. Give someone that power to remind you that you have power, and you are there to do the right thing, and you are there to protect the powerless. A little later in Iraq, I was given the opportunity for redemption, and I took it. If you remember, back in 2003, we had 7 soldiers do terrible things to the prisoners at Abu Ghraib. Things counter to the Geneva Convention. Well, the White House and the Secretary of Defense suppressed the story, suppressed the facts, suppressed the horrible pictures. 2004, when I'm in Baghdad in May, the whole story blew up. The Pentagon assigned me as the spokesperson. And I said to the Pentagon, I am not going to say, "I'm sorry, this will never happen again. We have a process in place. Believe us." I was going to tell the truth. Pentagon said, "Fine." So I just kept researching everything that went on in that prison, and I just kept pushing out the facts, pushing out the facts. And one day the White House called, a high official, and he said, "Morgenthaler, if you don't stop this, we can send you home in disgrace. You will never see general. Your career will end." And I thought of General George S. Patton, and one of his quotes is, "Do your duty as you see it, and damn the consequences." So I said to him, I accept the consequences. Rule number 3, when you use power for good, when you use power to protect the powerless, there may be consequences. Accept them. I entered the Army hoping to do 4 years, hoping maybe I'd make captain. Well, I got to be a badass. I got my badass mojo back after Abu Ghraib. And I realized these 3 rules were so important. Rule number 1, you must be willing to disobey an order, ignore a regulation, break the law to do the right thing. Rule number 2, give someone the authority to push you to do the right thing. And rule number 3, there may be consequences. Accept them. So at 30 years, I retired. And the White House was right. I retired as a colonel. Not bad. And the Army gave me the Bronze Star for telling the truth. Thank you.